Hello friends, I'm Steve Sandford. You're watching Dominion Report. One of the concerns I have for Canada and for Canadians is the rise in populist themes in our politics. As we head into an election, I think it's a good idea to talk about populism, what it is, where it comes from, and importantly, where it leads. At its core, populism is a political movement that begins by appealing to the common people while condemning the establishment and the political elites. Now, the meaning of the term has evolved over the decades, and there are still variations on the definition. But the type of populism I'm talking about leans toward and usually devolves into political tribalism. Now, populist movements generally flourish in times of widespread and chronic citizenry stress, usually financial stress. Populism often, but not always, rallies around a charismatic leader. That leader will generally speak to the core values and perhaps even the underlying unspoken feelings of the population that is stressed. That leader is usually more of an opportunist, using the challenges of the population as a means to gain power by speaking to their concerns, and sometimes with half-truths and misinformation. Now, populism of this kind often leads to what has been called tribal politics. This happens when the leader develops a feverish base who is unquestionably loyal and hyper-motivated to vote for that leader. And this is the worst part of populism and tribal politics. The leader will play on the fears of that voting base to the point where they will actually alienate a separate portion of the population, scapegoat them, and vilify them. This is what is sometimes called othering. You know, those others. Once a government starts to actively work for one portion of its citizenry while neglecting or even abusing another portion of its citizenry, democracy and freedom are under direct threat. Politics is supposed to be about differing beliefs on how to get to the same goal. That goal, usually something along the lines of prosperity, security for the country, long life and good health for the population. All of the population. You know, traditional right-wing and traditional left-wing parties differ on how to get there, but generally agree on the goal. They also agree on mutual respect, working together, compromise, give and take, and importantly, a respect for a duly elected party's mandate. Plus, there's supposed to be an understanding that if you are the duly elected party, there will come a time when you won't be, and that other party will be. And you will need to continue to work together in both scenarios. Populism and tribal politics undoes all of this. It paints the opposition party as the enemy. It presents portions of the population as the cause of the general public's problems. At its full evolution, it leads to authoritarianism and fascism. Let's look at an example of populism and tribal politics that comes to us fairly recently from south of the border. Donald Trump is a classic populist, and he is practicing tribal politics. Now, he didn't just show up on the scene in a healthy democracy that was totally prosperous and completely override it. He showed up at a time when the middle class had been wiped out of its purchasing power, when wealth had transferred up to the 1% and to the 0.1%, and when messaging had been repeatedly beat into the citizenry, populist messaging. At 2015, when he did show up, about let's just say that the top 1/10 of 1% had more combined net worth than the combined net worth of the bottom 50%. So out of 100 people, one of them had more wealth than 50 of them. And it wasn't just more wealth, it was actually 12 times, more than 12 times more wealth. With regard to messaging, Trump stepped into something that had been brewing since at least Barry Goldwater and the Southern Strategy. Now, a little bit of history here. FDR's New Deal in the 30s, actually two of them because there were two New Deals, it was credited with the post-World War II financial success of the United States. Democrats rode that success and rode the messaging for years. To fight against this political messaging success, Senator Barry Goldwater, a Republican presidential candidate in 1964, utilized what's now being called, or what even at the time was called, the Southern Strategy. This was an appeal to the deep south of the U.S. with throwbacks to the grievances of the U.S. Civil War. It employed racist dog whistles and coded language and policies on crime, on states' rights, and on welfare, to attract the white votes from the U.S. South. Now, although Goldwater didn't win, Nixon used the Southern Strategy, and he, of course, did win. In fact, every Republican administration since then has used this strategy to varying degrees. Now, a racist dog whistle is fairly subtle. Messages will speak to the racism that exists in some people while remaining innocuous and maintaining a level of plausible deniability regarding that racism. Now, when you do this, when you use a racist dog whistle, it means that you gain votes among a certain set of people. But there is a consequence, whether it's intended or not. And that consequence is you spread racist rhetoric across the population every election cycle. And of course, we know in the US, the election cycle starts the day after the election. So it's basically continuous. Now, decades of this can very much influence the beliefs of some of the citizenry, and certainly, or I should say, especially those who grow up in that environment. So after Nixon, Reagan came along and used populist rhetoric to demonize what he called welfare queens. And this was part of his messaging to reduce the government, which, as it turned out, wasn't in fact to reduce the government. It was to reduce the social services in order to finance tax cuts for the wealthy. Side note here, we were all told that his tax cuts for the wealthy would put more money in their pocket and generate more business, and that the wealth would trickle down. I think the middle class is still waiting, but I digress. Now, Bush II did the same thing. He legislated another giant tax cut for billionaires. Around this time or shortly after, Fox News showed up on the scene. Now, in order for Fox News to compete with the established news networks, it had to position itself differently. So it did so as the voice for right-wing voters. Facts, unfortunately, became secondary. Outrage generation became profit. And I'm not sure that journalism as an institution in the United States has actually even recovered. Now Fox and other right-wing media outlets continue to feed the narrative. When Obama was elected, the Southern Strategy became the Tea Party. Now, the Tea Party was a caucus on the Republican side of Congress. At the time, they were considered fairly extreme. In today's Republican world, what the Tea Party was promoting is pretty much just another day that ends with Y. Along comes, 8 years later, along comes Trump, and he stepped into this perfect storm of populism. And when he went immediately straight to tribal politics, You might remember drain the swamp, build the wall, lock her up. When he did that, there was a Republican base, financially stressed, that was ready and eager for that type of messaging. Now Trump is trying to go full fascist, and it looks like he might be succeeding, which honestly should terrify everybody. Some people still don't see it, but that's another topic for a different video. I think that the important lesson here for us in Canada is to see what happened so that it doesn't happen here. I would estimate we're about in the Nixon-Reagan era of the U.S. Southern strategy messaging. This is when the racist dog whistles were still subtle and easily dismissible. But here's the key, and this is how you can spot it. If a slogan, a phrase, or a policy or ideology discussion is carefully vetted, there will be zero way for it to be considered racist. However, if some people do consider it racist, while others dismiss it, then it probably wasn't very well vetted. In fact, more likely, it was probably chosen for exactly that, for its subtle dog whistle that does speak to the racist, but also offers plausible deniability. If you are hearing or you are having a conversation about whether a message is racist or not racist, just know that you're having that conversation by design. That is what they wanted. Most importantly, if you see hints of populism, if you see hints of tribal politics, maybe don't reward that political party with your vote. If people vote against that strategy, it will be discontinued. So there it is, my friends. Populism, tribal politics, and how to avoid it. I hope you found this useful. Please like and subscribe for more. In the meantime, stay strong, stay calm, and elbows up.